Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, we're looking at how to measure your healing progress because there's not oftentimes a machine you can just plug somebody into. Like your car, you get a check engine light and you go to the mechanic and they plug it into a machine. It says what's wrong, right? We don't always have that with our bodies, especially things like fatigue and exhaustion and pain levels. You can't just plug it in and go, oh, looks like your pain's a 6 out of 10 today. No, this is going to be much more subjective. So we don't want to get lost in the land of subjectivity. Right? Of course, labs are good, some quantitative feedback. You don't want to base everything you're doing on lab numbers. You're not going after a number, but it can be nice as a way to kind of look back and see some quantitative changes. But in today's video, outside of labs and outside of some kind of magic machine that's going to give you a printout of your pain levels, right? We're going to look at actually ways to know for sure that what you're doing is working or not in terms of your healing process and your healing path, because there are ways to keep track of this. There are ways to keep track of your progress. And if you know this, then you can start to pay attention to what's actually working. And some of these ways might surprise you. Let's get started. So immediately we need to look at two of the biggest factors to keep an eye on. One is frequency and the other is intensity. And this has to do with your symptoms. So for example, and again, this is going to be subjective, but if you're charting this, if you're paying attention to this and you're keeping track, you can look back at your journal and you can start to see trends. Right? It's very important. These, like within my programs, and we're taking people through the stages 1, 2, 3, 4, which you may have seen in other videos, right? Immune, digestive, neuroadrenal, blood circulation. It's really important to have tracking. This is something I set up and I kind of guide people through it. But even without that, you can just start to pay attention, right? You don't need somebody's permission to start doing this. You can just start doing it yourself and start paying attention to your frequency and your intensity of any symptom you want to track. So oftentimes people have fatigue or exhaustion, pain, wandering pains, or fixed stabbing pains, or dull achy pains, or nerve pains, all different kinds of pains, right? You might differentiate those into different things you're going to track, right? Different types of pain. There's also brain fog, mental clarity, focus, memory. How sharp do you feel? Quality of your sleep, right? Your general stress level, all the different things that matter to you. Maybe it's something about your digestion. I see people with all kinds of complex chronic health conditions. So fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, long haulers, mold exposure, candida, Epstein-Barr reactivated, right? There's a ton of these symptoms or syndromes, and they're all just growing. It seems like every year you turn around and there's a new handful of these diagnoses that are getting thrown around. It doesn't matter so much about your diagnosis. We're looking more at the actual manifestations of the diagnosis. So we're looking at the symptoms and how to track that. And then after you got that dialed in, then the next thing to do is to start to track your resilience, right? So how we do it, just to be clear here, start tracking your symptoms and matching it and correlating it to what you're doing or what you're not doing, right? And start paying attention to the intensity and the frequency. Meaning, one way to tell progress is if you have, let's say headaches is one of the things you're trying to track and you're trying to get down, because headaches really jam you up, right? I know how that goes. I've had migraines, they suck. No thank you, right? Takes you out. So let's say you're getting migraines, headaches, those kinds of things, and you're tracking those and you're going, okay, it seems like once a week, I'm having a 7 out of 10 migraine pretty consistently. And now you start doing a new therapy or a new process or whatever it is, and you notice that now you're still having 7 out of 10 migraines, right? The intensity hasn't changed, but you're having them once a month instead of once every week. So we're getting frequency to change, right? So that's a good sign. Sometimes it goes the other way, right? Sometimes you're still getting them every week, but instead of 7 out of 10, now it's a 3 out of 10. So the intensity is going down. Ideally, when you're healing, it's lovely to see both happen, right? I used to get 7 out of 10 migraines once a week, all the time. Now I get them once a month and it's a 3 out of 10 instead of a 7. Okay, that's a definite sign of progress. Nobody's going to argue with you on that. So get yourself dialed in. Doesn't substitute whatever symptom you want. If you have Crohn's disease or IBS or something like that, you might be looking at actually your bowel movements and going, wow, I have this cramping diarrhea attack 3 times a week. And it's however you want to set up your intensity, right? Measure that. It's like an 8 out of 10. And that's your starting point. That's your baseline. Write it down, because our memories are fallible. We will forget these things, especially if you're doing something, going through like a proper process and you're getting better. You tend to acclimate to the new normal, right? And you forget how bad it was. This is also something that happens with us because we're just human, right? We have memories that they're not perfect. So writing things down, or even making yourself little voice notes, or some kind of, you can do a video journaling, where you just kind of record a quick selfie every day. Okay, today my pain levels are at about a 6 out of 10. My energy levels about a 3 out of 10, right? Like that. And then you can track those. You can make yourself a little graph. And you can start to look at that data and look at what's going on and compare that to different things you're doing, right? Okay, this week I started going to bed 2 hours earlier every night, right? So for the next 2 weeks of doing that, I want to see, does that affect my energy level? Does that affect my pain level? Does that affect my anxiety? You start playing with all these variables. You want to have a way to track them so that you don't get lost in the complexity, right? Because this, by nature, healing from these complex chronic inflammatory conditions is complex. There is complexity, but we don't need to look at that complexity and get paralyzed by it. We can actually start to sort it out, and here's how, right? So you're starting to measure and track things, even if it's subjective, even if it's qualitative, your pain levels, right? But you quantify them, you give them some kind of number, even if it's arbitrary, but it's your scale, right? Which is totally fine. And you want to notice changes according to your scale in frequency and intensity. Now, the next thing, all right, this is where it starts to get kind of advanced. The next thing is to start looking at, can you hold and have more triggers? Or another way to look at that is, can the triggers that you're experiencing affect you less? So the first thing you have to do is start to identify your triggers. Now, triggers are going to come in terms of different type of body systems get affected. So you might have immune triggers, you might have digestive triggers, you might have neuroadrenal triggers, right? What's a neuroadrenal trigger? A stressful situation, right? Somebody who has bad boundaries or is trying to take advantage of you, right? Somebody who's used to like bullying you, somebody you don't like talking to that you have to deal with. That would be a neuroadrenal trigger, right? Any kind of stressful situation. Blood circulation, stage 4, right? What's a blood circulation trigger? Poor posture, getting in a car accident, getting injured, right? These kinds of things. Even exercising to some extent can become like a stressor for the circulatory system, right? So if you have a very low exercise threshold, maybe you notice that starts to improve without causing flares. That would be a good sign. That would be how you start to track improvement. So you may notice your actual symptom level of what's manifesting is the same. Okay, I've got a headache once a month and it's a 3 out of 10 and that's where I've gotten and that's where I'm staying and that's my baseline. I feel like I've plateaued. However, I do notice that I can eat a wider variety of foods, and the foods used to really give me migraines, but now my food sensitivity is getting down, which means food triggers, stage 2, digestive triggers, right? That seems to be something I'm becoming more resilient to. So that's another way to track your progress, your healing progress, kind of on the back end. So when you look at your body, you've got all these inputs coming in. I've talked about this in terms of whole systems. You need to learn whole systems thinking. This is something that we go into great depth on in our vault, where we have interactive videos so you can really get your hands on this. But you need to understand you've got these triggers coming in, these inputs. There's some kind of process happening with your body, and then you've got symptoms coming out the other end, right? So if you can handle more triggers and still have the same or less symptoms coming out, great. That's actually a sign of progress, even though you're still symptomatic. People beat themselves up. Oh, I'm still getting the headaches, right? Give yourself some credit. Actually, you can now eat a wider range of foods without it flaring you up. So that's one piece of this, okay, is being able to track those. Now, the second thing is a little bit more emotional or having to do with your perspective, is don't expect a straight line. Okay, I want to measure my frequency and intensity, and I want to see progress and improvement going up. Okay, I want to measure what kind of triggers I can take. I want to see progress and improvement going up. Healing is nonlinear. You will have dips, you will have setbacks, you will have flares, right? Try not to spiral out of control. I know it's actually quite easy to start panicking when that happens. So I'm here to just tell you, when you zoom out, most people, if they're doing things right, in the right order, with a proper process, sometimes you need guidance and help for this, right? But if you're following the right kind of process that's designed for you specifically to get your body better, and you're doing this, you will oftentimes have backslides, triggers, flares. It happens. You're going to have bad days. Life is nonlinear, right? But what you want to notice is that over time, you can zoom out and you will see some steady progress, even if there's some ups and downs. And especially if you backslide and then you have a map so that you know how to treat yourself, so that when you do backslide, you know, hey, I backslid back down to stage 1. I need to go back and work on stage 1 types of practices, stage 1 herbs, stage 1 interventions, and then work your way back through. You know, meaning backslides like, hey, I made it all the way to stage 3. Now I'm working on my neuroadrenals. And then I got an immune trigger and I couldn't handle it. And now I've got a big flare up and I feel all inflamed and I'm tired today. Don't freak out. Okay, we know right where you are. You just, snakes and ladders, you just backslid down to stage 1. We know how to move from there. We know how to get back to where you were, right? We don't have to freak out. So when you look at that, healing is nonlinear. And just like sailing, right? Sailboats, if they're going into the wind, they have to tack. They have to move kind of side to side, right? They don't go straight where they're headed. But with some skill and knowing what you're doing, being able to read the environment, you can just kind of weave back and forth until you get where you were headed in the first place, right? It may not be a straight line, but sometimes the shortest path isn't a straight line, right? Because pushing a straight line is just banging your head into the wall. Sometimes the shortest path is actually to go with some of the ups and downs and not freak out. Enjoy the ride, but also know you've got a stable and predictable process as architecture underneath your plans. So if you're dealing with a complex chronic health condition and you're feeling alone or overwhelmed, you don't have to struggle. You don't have to be by yourself. You don't have to be overwhelmed. You can find clarity and camaraderie in our Modern Vitality Solutions and Support group. It's free. It's a chat group. We're off big tech. I can say anything I want in there without worrying about censorship, which means I can be very candid and very complete. You can ask me anything you want in there. It's free to join as a guest. You can get my perspective. You're right over my shoulder. I'm helping people all over the world work through this process, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and get their lives back from all kinds of complex chronic health conditions like Lyme, fibromyalgia, mold exposure, chronic fatigue syndrome. There's a ton of them. We take all kinds of people in there because we're not looking at the diseases. We're looking at the actual human. What can we do with your body system? So if you'd like to observe that, if you'd like to get into our interactive vault of videos and start learning more about yourself and kind of where you're at, what your next steps might be, and get some clarity there, and maybe have a little bit of fun in the process, because we are actually quite a nice group. It's lovely, positive people. We have a sense of humor in there, right? That's a bit of a prerequisite to have a good sense of humor, even though this is serious business, right? But we're not coming in all fragile. We're going to come in, we're going to laugh a little bit. So it's a nice place to be. I'd encourage you to apply. If I see your application, which you can find the link, it's in the description down there. If I see your application, it looks really good, I'll get you in just as soon as I can. But I do keep the group cozy so that I know who's in there, which does mean we fill up. There may be a wait. Could be a couple weeks, could be a month, could be 2 months, could be more. So just know that I'll get you in as soon as I can. Keep an eye on your email for your acceptance. If your application looks really good, of course. I don't accept everybody that comes in. Sometimes it's just not a good fit for what we do, which is also fine, and it's a respectful process. But if you're in, you're in. I'll let you know as soon as I can. But there might be a bit of a wait. In the meantime, consider liking this channel, subscribe to this channel, right? Like this video. Do whatever you got to do to tell the algorithm that this kind of stuff's important to you. That way, you're now taking some power over what you get shown on the internet, instead of just being swept away through the algorithm and the feeding of the scroll frenzy, right? You want to start to control some of that. So engage with that, interact with that, and then you'll learn more. You learn more about how to take care of your health, how to get your life back. It's probably some of the most important things going on right now for you. It's not just about distraction, entertainment when you go on the internet, right? You're trying to learn things so that you can empower yourself. So tell the algorithm, right? Tell it what's important. All right, I hope this video helps you. Let's get you feeling better. Cheers.